the only way that your culture sticks together is by staying in South Africa. Because if you come to America after one generation, you're an American.
Yeah, I'm happy you say that, because it's an important point. Is this refugee thing has been good in the sense that it has really, it's like taking a spotlight and just shining a light on the crisis, and it provides opportunities for diplomatic pressure and so forth. But if the only thing that America does with regard to South Africa is refugees, it would actually make things worse, partly because some people will leave, as we can see, will leave South Africa, especially people who have gone through trauma, who have been in a farm attack, or who have lost their job or something like that. And you can see that already in South Africa. The people who leave in higher numbers, or who want to leave in higher numbers, are not the Afrikaners. It's more the white English-speaking community. And it's because the Afrikaners, I mean, you mentioned it. I mean, I'm 10th generation in Africa.
But Ernst, explain as well, because the Afrikaners don't actually exist outside of South Africa.
So we're indigenous to South Africa.
Yeah.
We're not indigenous to any other country. We became a people in South Africa. We called ourselves the Afrikaners, and our language is Afrikaans. So everything, and like we have this very rich treasure chest of Afrikaans literature and folk songs and philosophy. And that's the funny thing. All of it is about how much we love South Africa.
And born of the soil.
Yes.
Right? Born of the soil of South Africa, because Afrikaans isn't spoken anywhere else. It's not a language anywhere else in the world. It was the original Dutch, right?
It sort of evolved from Dutch into a unique language with other influences. So yes, so there's this, and we've always been a small nation, and there's this thing about small nations, and the risk of small nations is that the threat is always bigger. Any threat is existential, but the benefit.
And how many Afrikaners are there worldwide?
I'm not sure how many there are worldwide, but there are about 2.7 million in South Africa.
That's and there's not more than 1 million or so outside.
Yeah, you can. Let's say it would be less than 5 million worldwide.
Yeah, so there's less than 5 million Afrikaners that exist on the planet.
Yes. Yeah. So, but the thing is, if you're a small nation, then you take threats also much more seriously. And we've had many threats over the centuries, and we've had many wars. We've had the 2 wars with the British. We had wars with the Zulus.
The first concentration camps in the world were the British.
The first concentration camps were
in South Africa.
In the Anglo-Boer War. Yes, and so forth and so forth. And so we've had all these hardships in South Africa, and I can tell you stories from what my great-great-grandfather 4 or 5 generations ago did when they were in this war, and it's sort of this feeling that if you just pack up and leave, then you leave all of this behind. And so we need a solution in South Africa. It's not.
So if I can be a little bit challenging here, because from the other side of it, what would you say would be where do the Afrikaners bear responsibility for the situation in South Africa in terms of, I mean, we as South Africans were under a system that was of racial division. Which discriminated heavily against black people, and and that is a contributing factor, right?
Yes. So that's a good question. I think a lesser known part of the story at the moment is just how much Afrikaners and white people in general in South Africa have done just out of their own will for upliftment and development and so forth. So there was a study when the ANC started with these race laws, with the affirmative action and the BEE, and they said you need to have quota systems and you need to have transformation policies in the workplace, as they define it. There was a study that came out that said that predominantly white-owned companies, at the time, before these laws were implemented, more than 90% of them already had such policies in place to say, how can we help like upcoming young black entrepreneurs, how can we support them? And the farmers especially do that. And I know there's this stereotype of the farmers in South Africa being racist and all of that, but especially the commercial farmers. Like almost all of them are involved with helping black upcoming farmers and having these cooperational programs and so forth. So I think they already do a lot. But I think from a more, like you could say, policy perspective, there's a difference between restitution and redistribution. And restitution is a good thing. So if there's a piece of land, for example, that was owned by a black community and that was dispossessed from them, someone came, the government or whoever came and took that land from them 70 years ago or whatever, then restitution is good to say, well, let's correct this injustice. Let's give them their land back. But what happens now is literally more than 90% of people who have filed land claims in South Africa have said actually they don't want the land. If they can choose, they would rather opt for financial compensation.
Money. But
Yeah.
will you acknowledge, though, the racial part and the racism of the past?
Oh, and absolutely, yes. But that the
I mean,
apartheid.
that has to be done, right?
Yeah, the problem is it has to be done, but we need to differentiate between when are we actually correcting a historical injustice as opposed to
Yeah.
are we just punishing white people because they are white? So if an example would be you go to South Africa, let's say I decide I want to be a farmer, which I obviously can't be, and I buy a piece of land. You cannot make the argument that my ownership of that land is illegitimate simply because I'm white, because I actually bought it. I didn't steal it from anyone. I bought it with my own money.
Yeah.
But there were cases where people were dispossessed of their land, and that should be corrected. That's restitution. But simply saying white ownership is illegitimate because the owner is white, regardless of how he acquired that land, that's very problematic. If you acquire land through legitimate means, that should be recognized.
I think what some people want is just an acknowledge of the pain of the past, where people were subjected to a lot of brutality because of the color of their skin, and the Afrikaners were part of that. I mean, Hendrik Verwoerd was the architect of apartheid as a political system, and he was an Afrikaner.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, I think you're right. What makes that difficult today, in the climate in which we are, is this thing about apologizing in this very heavily loaded political context.
Yeah.
Apologizing is seen as an admission of guilt and a justification for punishment.
Yes.
And so, and it's especially in countries like
And
America.
an excuse for theft and corruption.
Yes. And then it becomes, exactly. And so, an example of the Dutch Prime Minister, I think 2 years ago, after significant pressure, he made this public apology for slavery. And then
Yeah.
the response to that was, okay, now you need to prove that you are really sorry.
Yeah.
And you need to give us money. So if you don't follow up your
Yeah.
apology by giving us your stuff, then you don't really mean it.
But he's one of the chosen successors to Klaus Schwab at the World Economic Forum. Rutte is one of the worst, and he has decimated the farming and agricultural industries in Holland.
We saw the apology struggle sessions like during 2020 during the riots, and everyone was like, well, if you just apologize and like rectify, maybe it'll stop. And then it just kept getting worse and worse and worse. And it's like, yes, it is true. Like, it is true that we need to rectify for these past injustices. But at the same time, it's like they don't actually want an apology. They want you to bend the knee.
I feel like the idea of rectifying past injustice is an endless cycle that never ends, because injustice is everyone's faced some injustice no matter what, going back every generation for the existence of all humanity.
Well, especially when you're making your two ancestors, they're trying to settle that debt. That's crazy to me, because it's like, had nothing to do with me, had nothing to do with you.
There's
an effect, but there's no way to rectify this. There's no way to,
there's
pay the debt.
a viral video from like 10 years ago. I think it's called like This Land Is My Land, where it shows, it's basically one song sung by one person, but the visual is different armies with different flags taking over the Holy Land back and forth, claiming that this is their land and it's owed to them.
Yeah.
Even a big component right now of like the Israel-Palestine conflict is Israelis and Jews saying that historically it was it was their land, it was Israel or Judea, and then Islam took it over. But now the left argues that those people there who are Palestinians are the original inhabitants, and you're taking it back. Yep. Everyone's claiming their birthright or their ancestral right to this land. It's never going to end.
The land claim
but
stuff.
there's only one truth, though. That's the problem with all.
How far back do you go?
Well, I mean, I'll give you an example. So I went to a village I was reporting for 60 Minutes on the Christians in northern Iraq, which was ancient Mesopotamia. And I went to a village where it was just outside of Mosul when ISIS was still in control, and they had ravaged all of the surrounding countryside, and they had just lost this one village. And we went in there, and the history was that Jesus had walked the streets of this village. And I wanted to know if that was true. So one of the ways to try to verify that was to figure out, first of all, is the village old enough for Jesus to have walked there? So I asked people, how old is the village? When was the village built? And, this is Iraq, right? So and concept of time is very different depending on who you speak to. So I'm asking 20 people, I'm getting 20 different answers, and I'm ready to blow my brains out. So I'm like, okay, how can I figure this out? So I say, you know what? Why don't you take me? I said, what is the oldest building in the village? And then there's a big conversation. I say, take me to the oldest building in the village. So where do you think they took me? Honestly, I was expecting to go to the mosque, but that's not where I went. You know where I went? The synagogue.
Oh, wow.
And they took me to the synagogue. And not only was the synagogue the oldest building in the village, but it was the oldest by centuries. And then I said, okay, I'm on a roll here. And it's written in the stone, right? So it's not like they're making it up. And then these are Iraqi Muslims who are telling me this. So I say, okay, what's the next oldest building? And they took me then to the Assyrian church, and there was a service which we attended. So I was like, man, where is it the mosque?
Right.
You know, I mean, I lived in Iraq for 5 years. This was after I had left, and had gone back on another trip. And in my head, in my mind, this territory was cemented as Islamic ground. And so they were like, oh yeah, we can take you to the mosque. Well, the first mosque wasn't built in that village until more than 600 years after the church. So for 6 centuries, there's this whole idea that you can't figure out who really owns the land is nonsense. Because for 6 centuries, there were no Muslims in there at all. None. And
what do we do? Do we give the land back to the Christians?
Yes.
well,
So then we give America back to the Native Americans, divvy up the land based on the Native.
Christians, just stop there.
well, first of all, the idea, what do we do? That's like a, sort of the idea that a solution is imposed from the outside. I mean, the good thing about being a journalist is I don't have to fix anything. I just have to point how broken everything is and whose fault it is. But what I can tell you is that it starts, for me as a journalist, it starts with the truth. Like, let's acknowledge the truth. Let's not pretend that the Temple Mount was not the Temple Mount before Al-Aqsa Mosque. Al-Aqsa Mosque came later. So it's interesting that you raise this, because if you actually look at Islam, the philosophy is in the Quran is that we are all Muslim. Our DNA is Muslim, which is a little tricky when you look at the fact that how many years after Judaism and after Christianity, the Ottoman Empire and Islam really came along. It's like, so what were we for all those years before the Quran was written? Well, we were all Muslim somehow. So that's where, in Islam, critical thinking is not encouraged. It's very much that you need to accept the tenets of the Quran and the orders of Sharia, and you need to live by that, and you need to not question it. In fact, that's one of the marked differences with Christianity, is that we have free will. So I would say that it begins with the truth. And I'm not saying that you give everything back to the original, but I just want to show you that there's another extension to this argument of who is the land. I sat with Zulu tribesmen in Zululand, actually in KwaZulu-Natal, and we were doing a story for 60 Minutes on saving the white rhino from extinction. And one of the solutions from the conservationists is that you have to connect all this land, because the animals used to be able to roam, and now they can't roam because of fences and all the rest of it. And so when I was talking to these guys, one of the things they asked me is, why do white people like these animals so much? And I was like, well, what,
why not?
Well, for all these reasons, and why don't you like them? And they're like, sure, we like them. But I mean, we lived with rhinos forever. We've been here forever. Like, this guy had never been 2 hours to the coast where I was born, had never seen the ocean, had never been north to Johannesburg, one of the centers of the country, had never been outside of KwaZulu. And so when we went through this conversation, I explained the whole thing with the land and the animals and everything. And they looked at me and they said, okay, so this land belonged to the animals. And I said, well, I guess that's sort of the thinking. And they said, so what land belongs to us? Because we've also been here from the beginning. We've also never been anywhere else. We also don't have anywhere else to go. Why doesn't it belong to us? Why do we have no claim to the land as humans? And that was very interesting for me and very revealing, because you can see that argument playing out all over the world, that we as humans are an aberration. Everything we've done, look in California, more than 1 million acres of the Central Valley have been returned to its natural state before being destroyed by man. What's the natural state of the Central Valley? Because the breadbasket, one of the breadbaskets of the entire world is the Central Valley of California, some of the richest, most fertile agricultural soil. Well, under its natural state, it's a desert. So why do you think now in those Hispanic towns all across the Central Valley, you have higher poverty rates than Appalachia, which historically has been the highest poverty in the United States? And no one cares about it, right? But why returning the land to its natural state before man is not always a better idea. In fact, what it's done is cause rivers to dry up across Texas, and you can find environmental disasters all across the United States because of the interference of conservationists who argue that the land has to go back to its natural state. So this idea that we as people have no claim to the land and everything that we do is destructive, that's another lie. That's profoundly anti-human. And what they're going to do once they're done with the whites in South Africa, because it's not really about race, they don't care that black people are going to starve to death. They don't care about any of that, because once they're done with, okay, the whites are now the target, then it's going to be these people are the target, and then it's going to be those people are the target. Because at its core, all of these philosophies are profoundly anti-human. They don't sell you Marxism because they love the people. There's no Marxist country on earth where the people have been better off. It's always been a small group of people that have absolute control, who have, by the way, millions have starved in Marxist communist countries. So it's the same thing. What you see underneath all of this, the depopulation agenda and so on, is that these people have no regard or respect for the average person. And the elites in Washington look down on them.
Thanks for watching this clip from the Culture War podcast. We're live every Friday, 10 a.m. to noon. So subscribe and come hang out.